Hello everyone, welcome back to another in-depth playthrough here on the channel. This time we are looking at Pac-Man on the NES. As you can see, I actually just jumped right in. I didn't even care. I said, let's play some Pac-Man. I was very excited actually about this one because I actually am a huge fan of Pac-Man, especially in 2019 specifically. I actually played a ton of arcade Pac-Man. Be it on arcade machines or some of the arcade perfect ports that we've seen in recent years. I played a lot of it in 2019. So I was pretty excited, looking through some things in my collection. I was like, yeah, you know what, let's play some Pac-Man. So, just a disclaimer real quick, as you guys see, this is obviously the NES version. That I'm actually playing this off of my NES Classic. Just feel like that should be noted here. Which is a little different from the arcade version, both visually and, I don't want to say mechanically, but I guess as a lack of a better term, mechanically is slightly different. But basically what I'm getting at there is the controls, right? So anybody who's played an arcade game and then tried to play an 80s console counterpart, anybody who's been in those shoes completely understands what I mean when I say that it just controls differently. And of course Pac-Man is no exception. But just to start things off, it's Pac-Man. I think just about everybody on the planet's played it, but for the two of you that haven't, it's very simple. In fact, you actually just saw me complete a level. All you gotta do is just collect all the dots in the maze and you win. Obviously, you're trying to avoid the ghosts, and if you come into contact with them, you lose life. The whole point of the game is clearly to get a high score. That's really what the name of the game was back in the day, especially in the arcades. And that's really all there is to it. No story, none of that. Just good old classic arcade fun. Trying to go for the high score, this, that, and the other. Now, I came on to do all this commentary for this. I realized it's like, well, it's Pac-Man, how much can you really say about Pac-Man? We're about 2.5 minutes into this video, and quite honestly, there's not really much left to talk about. On that note, though, I did want to kind of discuss some of the differences, because, like I said, it's Pac-Man. Everybody's played Pac-Man. We all kind of understand what we're getting into. And I think for the most part, it's safe to say that most people probably like Pac-Man. I'm not going to go out there and say that everyone likes it, because I'm sure there's somebody out there who does not. But, it's a classic for a reason. So, on that note, I find when discovering a game such as Pac-Man, that it's more important, or I guess in this instance specifically, that really the conversation is better dictated by the port you're playing. Because when it comes to arcade games, oh goodness, everybody just wants to play the arcade perfect port, and for good reason. Arcade ports are typically the best port of any game. Once again, Pac-Man is no exception to that. So what do we have different between the NES port and the arcade port? Well, the simple stuff, kind of the presentation, it's nowhere near as vibrant. I find that the color palette used in the NES port is a little dull, and some of the sprites have gotten a bit of a downgrade. If you, the example I like to point out the most when I bring that up is the fruit. It just kind of look a little silly in this game, and I know that's a weird thing to say. It's like failing their fruit. Like, what do you want them to look like? I get it, but even something as simple as a piece of fruit can have a high level of detail when it comes to, I guess, an art style, and even in just arcade pixels. It can be a pretty big difference. I'm serious. Go look up the sprites for the fruit in the arcade version and compare it to these. It's not as clean. It's not as clean. But again, that's kind of what I'm getting at with the whole color palette thing. It's just a little bit more dull in my opinion. Of course, I spent that whole time talking about the presentation. We've already gone through the single player portion where I royally sucked. Not my best game of Pac-Man by a long shot. And you know what? I think that's a good segue into talking about what I meant about the controls earlier. Real quick, this is now multiplayer footage. I asked my sister for some assistance on this. I was like, "Hey, let's play some Pac-Man. Let's get some multiplayer action going." And she was nice enough to come in and help me out. So, for what you're seeing, I'm player 1. My sister's player 2. I lost a life really early there. That bummed me out. But regardless, so on the note of the controls, and again, this is going to be something that's just difficult to explain, because, like I said earlier, if you're somebody who's played an arcade port of a game, and then try to play a port of the game that is not arcade perfect, there are some very minute differences in how the game feels that leads it to just not be as much fun. And while I think that the NES port of Pac-Man is one of the better ports from this time, you know, it unfortunately still has that some of those problems. So for one thing, and again, I'm trying to explain this as best I can, but for one thing, I feel that Pac-Man, or just the game in general, is a little bit slower on the NES in comparison to the arcade, where it seems like Pac-Man is just blazing down the maze. You know, he moves a lot faster than the arcade, so that's one thing. Not really a big deal, but it is a little different. And there are a couple things I feel like, as far as like the collision of certain things go. I probably saw it in my single player run, and you'll definitely see it later on here in the multiplayer run when it's back to my turn. But there are times where I'm going straight up for like a power pellet, so I can start eating the ghosts. And it looks like Pac-Man eats it, so I do an immediate 180 to try to get the ghost behind me. But then I die because it actually didn't get the power pellet. And like I said, you'll see this again here in a bit once my turn comes back up on the multiplayer. And it, you know, it's not even just that. It would be times when I'm like, when I do have the power pellet and I'm like rushing by and it looks like I was, you know, in the right area to eat a ghost, but it just barely scoots by. That kind of stuff. And, you know, and I'm not saying that's necessarily anything on the game. Maybe it's just me misjudging. But I'd never had that issue when I was playing any of the arcade versions of Pac-Man. And again, let me remind you, like I said, 2019, Pac-Man is one of the games I played the most. It just, I don't know, I just fell in love with some arcade fun, and I was like, I gotta have some Pac-Man. Got the nice 1600 there, by the way. I wanted to point that out. Definitely pulled me ahead in the score game. But yeah, like I said, it's a hard thing to describe if you haven't played the arcade version to compare for yourself. That being said, if you aren't really privy to details like that, or maybe you just haven't played the arcade version, or don't have access to it, which would be super weird because it is on mobile phones, regardless. The NES port, in my opinion, is still a really good port of the game. You know, take out the fact that it's not arcade perfect. You know, you remove that fact, I still find it to be a pretty good port if you want some classic Pac-Man action. And especially if you're limited to some of the technology from around this time, or purposely limiting yourself to that technology anyhow. Like I mentioned before, I do believe this is one of the better ports from that era. It certainly kicks the 2600 version out of the water, that's for sure. Not 100% on the 5200 version, as I actually heard that one's pretty good. But even if it is better than this one, you're still dealing with the 5200, which, as far as the hardware goes, not even talking about Pac-Man in general, a much worse experience. You'll probably have your controller snap in half mid-playthrough. But it is what it is. I actually am curious, and I should have looked this up before I started this. I'm actually curious as to when this came out. Let's run a quick search on that. Okay, so let's see. Well, it looks like the arcade version came out in May and October 1980 for Japan and North America, respectively. I can't find anything on the NES one on this page. Let's see. Oh, 84 on the NES. So that's not too bad. Yeah, like I said, I think it's pretty good for 84. Side note, I also like that they kept the cutscenes intact. I know that's like a pretty integral part of Pac-Man, because that was one thing, a little bit of trivia for you. The head developer, Pac-Man, whose name I do not know off the top of my head. Point is, he was very adamant on leaving those cutscenes in to make the game more appealing. I guess in a way you could say that Pac-Man's easily one of the first games to have kind of a personality to it. I don't want to say character, because that's kind of not really the case. But when you think of games with personality, and you wanted to think like as old as it gets in that department, it's probably Pac-Man, and it's just because of those cutscenes. They really serve nothing to the gameplay. It does nothing for your score. It doesn't change anything. It's just a cool little cutscene to kind of take off the stress of playing Pac-Man. Because let's be honest, Pac-Man is retro survival horror. Let's be 100% honest here. So I mean, it's a neat little touch, and I wouldn't have expected them to remove the cutscenes, but the 80s were a different time for sure, and I'm glad that they're still there. Alright, and as we wrap up here, you see my sister actually got a game over, so her score is capped at 7740. I was able to get over 10,000, so that got me an extra life, which I wasted terribly earlier. But it is what it is. And yeah, actually, that right there, trying to eat Clyde, I swear it looked like I was going to get him, so I kind of like panicked for a second there when I didn't. I was like, wait a minute, this is fucking weird. It is what it is. I got sandwiched there hard, and that was a little awkward. But that's game over for me, capping things off at 13,550. Again, not my best run in Pac-Man, but it is what it is. Say la vie. That's life. But as short as it is, that was Pac-Man on NES. Like I said, I do think it's a pretty good port, especially from around that time. But like I also said, just if you can play the arcade port, please do yourself a favor and just play that one instead. It's much better in my opinion, much more worth your time. Not to say that this one isn't, but like if you have the chance to play the arcade version, just go with that one. It's a lot faster, it feels much smoother. But hey, if you got an NES Classic and really no other way to play Pac-Man, this is a good way to go. So, that being said, that was a relatively short, quick, in-depth playthrough for you guys. I'm actually kind of surprised I was able to stay talking for most of that. It is what it is. Anywho, thank you all for watching. I'll see y'all around in the next video. Have a good one.